Ole Miss has the deepest roster in all of college football, and the NFL knows it.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. On today's episode, we're diving into this incredible roster that Lane Kiffin has built over the last 4 years. This roster is now catching the eye of the NFL, with Ole Miss leading the way with players on the Senior Bowl watch list. Jaxson Dart, Trey Harris, and Walter Nolan are among the Rebels making headlines, but they are by far not the only ones, as they attract serious attention from the pros. What does that mean for Ole Miss this season? We'll break it all down for you. Stay tuned. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Hotty toddy, everyone. This is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. And a special hello to these everydayers and insiders who make the show what it is. And don't forget to find a second listen on the network, Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC, or even Corey Burton on Locked On Vandy. They provide other perspectives around college football, the SEC, and even Ole Miss. And you know how I feel about perspectives, so check it out. Ultimate College Football HC is a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Use the promo code Locked On CFP, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. Really interesting stuff yesterday. The Senior Bowl put out its watch list that it does every year getting ready to go into the season, and Ole Miss led all schools with members on it with 21, including what will be potentially the whole starting defense. We'll talk about that in just a second. When you look at it, David Johnson says it's serious with 21 selections to the recent Senior Bowl watch list. And you look at them on defense, Key Lawrence, Trey Washington. You've got both corners and Trey Amos and Isaiah Hamilton. Trey Washington, Key Lawrence, and Yam Banks is on it as well. Chris Pupal, and of course, other players as well. I think maybe Kari Coleman. It's kind of hard for me to read this. But the defensive line is there as well. And when you look at the way it sits as what the whole SEC was able to do, you can see that Ole Miss won it. A&M is second with 20. Georgia has 20 as well. Several teams are in the teens. Vanderbilt is at 7, and Mississippi State, they're at 6. So Vandy did not finish last in the Senior Bowl watch list as well. This is from CJ Vogel, OTF. Really interesting stuff when you look at the players that Ole Miss is kind of listed. And that shows that the NFL is taking notice of this team. 21 players. Hey, if you look at a starting offense and a starting defense, that's 22 players right there. And if you look at the defense itself, every player that could be starting is on the defense. And with those being potential NFL players, I think it's important to realize exactly where they could stand, what they're thought of, and what the NFL thinks of the talent on this roster. We're going to talk in the next segment of, is Ole Miss good enough? Is the depth there for Ole Miss to make a run at a national title? We're going to talk about how this could go wrong in the third segment. But right now, we're talking about all the outside plaudits that Ole Miss is getting. I think Lane Kiffin retweeted this tweet that I put up just a second ago with ultimate rat poison. And he's not entirely joking there. When the NFL is taking notice of the players that you have, that's a very good thing for your team. It's almost no way a bad thing unless they rest on their laurels. But they have the talent to be very, very good. The NFL thinks, and the Senior Bowl thinks, that this Ole Miss team has a chance to be in the probably top 5 in the entire country. They also think that Texas A&M might be a little bit underrated. And this all tracks with what the NFL is thinking of. The Locked On Ole Miss prediction, I have Ole Miss at 11-1 this season, with the only loss being to the Georgia Bulldogs. Wins on the road at LSU at South Carolina, a win over Oklahoma, and a win in Fayetteville. Ole Miss has the talent to get this done behind some of the talented players that they have. Just looking over this, Jaxson Dart, who Mike Detillier was on the podcast a couple of months back and talked about the improvement that he was expecting out of Jaxson Dart, similar to what Jaden Daniels did at LSU a year ago. You look at Jaxson Dart's number, 233 completions, 358 attempts, 3,364 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. It's more than a 4-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio that will hunt. And when you look at Caden Prieskorn, who was injured for a good portion of last year, but might be the best tight end in the country, against Penn State, against the number one defense in all of college football, Caden Prieskorn just 10 catches, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 2-point conversion on his way to the offensive MVP. But it's not just offensive players. The transfers are getting in on the act as well. Walter Nolan is very highly thought of by NFL personnel. Last year, 37 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, and 4 sacks from his interior defensive line spot. And Princely Umanmielen, if he wanted to, could have went pro this year. That's what people need to realize about Princely. He could have went pro this year, and he would have been drafted probably in the late first round, early second round area of the draft because of his athletic ability, his size, and all of that stuff. At Florida last year, he had 39 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks. He is the PFS number 1 pass rusher in an obvious passing down. So when he knows where you're going to be, you're in trouble. Ole Miss has had a lot of players that are popping up. Trey Harris, who might be the best wide receiver in all the country, 54 catches, 985 yards, 8 touchdowns. Jordan Watkins, Mr. Reliable. He gets overlooked a little bit on Ole Miss's roster. He doesn't get overlooked by the NFL. He's on the watch list as well. You look at Ulysses Bentley IV, and the head of the Senior Bowl talking about a lot of NFL teams had Ulysses Bentley with a higher draft grade than one Quinshon Judkins, and that makes me perk up a little bit as well talking about it. You look at Logan Diggs, who made the list. He is recovering from an ACL. He might not make it to the Senior Bowl because he's back in college another year. We'll see, but he was on the watch list as well. And then defensive players like Key Lawrence, obvious on the list, from Oklahoma, had 44 tackles, 2 picks, 3 passes defended. Trey Amos, obviously a super defensive back at cornerback. Isaiah Hamilton's on the list. Trey Washington, we did yesterday's podcast about him. He's on the list as well. You can see that Ole Miss players have a ton of players on this list, and Yam Banks is on there as well with all the talent in the world. I'm really interested to see because the NFL thinks very highly of the roster that Lane Kiffin has assembled. To the point, according to the Senior Bowl, they might have the best 22 on the field. On just about whoever they play, they might have the best 22 on the field. Now, the question becomes depth, and specifically title depth, because Lane Kiffin talked about the difference between Ole Miss this year and how it compares with those USC teams of the early 2000s, how it compares to the Alabama teams of the 2010s. And Lane Kiffin said, well, it's different because I don't know if teams like that are ever going to exist again because of the transfer portal. And you can't just stockpile players one after the other. It is impossible in Lane Kiffin's mind to have an 85 that's at those levels. But this Senior Bowl watch list lets you know that this might be the deepest football team for Ole Miss in all of college football this year, with 21 players on the watch list, essentially the starting lineup on offense, the starting lineup on defense, all on the watch list as well. Juice Wells made it onto the watch list as well. Forgot that one. Jeremy James, Micah Pettis made it. A bunch of people, I may have missed names. It was not intentional. But the NFL has taken notice of this Ole Miss team, and they might have the deepest roster in all of college football. Is it deep enough to hoist that trophy? Because there's other really deep teams as well. They're the Georgia Bulldogs, the Ohio State Buckeyes, the Alabama Crimson Tide have a team essentially of 4 stars and might have the best blue chip ratio of everybody in college football. So does Ole Miss have the depth to actually win a title? We will talk about that in just a second. With a deeper roster than ever before, could this be the year that Ole Miss finally wins the last game of the season? Stick around to find out if Ole Miss has what it takes to go all the way. It's summertime, and that means it's barbecue season. Stock up on all your grilling favorites and earn cash backs on every purchase when you use Ibotta. So you won't have to choose between burgers or hot dogs. You can just get both. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn hundreds on items from groceries to beauty supplies or even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter how you're purchasing. And with over 2,400 brands to shop at, over 1,000 retailers to be at, including your favorite grocery stores like Kroger or Publix, or even other type stores like Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, and Best Buy, you can shop there as well. It's time to join the over 50 million users who use Ibotta and earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash backs and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, or use code LOCKEDONCollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On College Football Podcast with Spencer McLaughlin. He gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion of that upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the portal, NIL, the new college football expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the question is, after the Senior Bowl, does Ole Miss have enough depth to win a national title this season? It's an interesting thought exercise because Ole Miss has gone about assembling this roster in different ways. So the general rules of how you judge a roster doesn't really apply. It's going to come down to whether or not Ole Miss can win the games on the schedule. And Ole Miss this year, as you saw from the Loon prediction, I'm predicting them at 11-1, which would get them into the tournament. And once you get into the tournament, you can make a run just by depending on your draw. So does Ole Miss have the depth once they have to deal with the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Georgia Bulldogs and the Alabama Crimson Tides? Those teams, those top 4, top 5 teams, does Ole Miss have the depth to actually compete against and defeat the team in front of them? And I think they do. I think they do. When you look at the Senior Bowl watch list of the NFL type players that they're going to be keeping an eye on, and all of these guys are going to end up in camps next season, likely. All of Ole Miss's defense potentially starting is on that watch list. And that's an important step because this offense has always been good. Lane Kiffin has had a good offense the entire time that he has been in Oxford, Mississippi. Whether they had Matt Corral was at quarterback, whether Jeff Lebby was offensive coordinator, or Jaxson Dart or Charlie Weiss Jr. This team has always had a very good offense. The problem that Ole Miss has had is twofold. One, their line of scrimmage play, while good and good enough to win most games, was not good enough to get over the hump. See the Georgia game a year ago, to where they just completely got rolled over in the trenches. But Ole Miss going through the transfer portal and bringing in different players on the offensive and defensive line, like Walter Nolan. We'll bring this up again. Walter Nolan and Princely Umanmielen on the defensive line, paired with J.J. Pegues and Jared Ivey, that is a top 5, top 6 offensive or defensive line in the entire country. So if they remain healthy, this defensive line and this defense as a whole, either Chris Pupal, TJ Daughtery, sorry about that, or the new linebacker, Rodney Gross, that just showed up on the roster yesterday, you have to think by the end of the year, they could all be making noise and making this defense very good. And the defensive back, which NFL prospects back there as well, all of a sudden they're going to be the beneficiary. So what does that mean? That means that Ole Miss, instead of, look at the LSU game a year ago to where Ole Miss won the game. I think it was 51-45. They won that game. Ole Miss is not going to be in a position to where they're playing 51-49, 5 games. That game, if this year it got played with Ole Miss's defense this year, even put a Heisman quarterback in there, put those first-round wide receivers in there, with this Ole Miss team, that game is a 51-24 type ball game, and it isn't particularly close. And in the second half, it's basically over. The Georgia game looks a lot different. Now, it might be similar in the fact that Ole Miss loses the game, but the score isn't going to look like that. That situation in Athens, you look up and all of a sudden all of their players are healthy. The place is a cauldron. It's on ABC or ESPN. Ole Miss just kind of ran into a buzzsaw that night. It happens in college football. But I don't think that happens this year. I think that is a much different game in 2024 than 2023. So yes, Ole Miss can win the national title. They've got the depth. The players like Chris Hardy, the players like Kamarion Franklin, Akello Stone, players like John Saunders and Trey Washington, potentially with the other transfer pieces, they've added to this because Lane Kiffin has been very intentional with building this roster. And he has built this roster for a 16-game season. Everything is for a 16-game season. And to get ready, to get in the tournament and to advance in the tournament. That is what Lane Kiffin has built this team to do. And because of that, the depth is greater than it's ever been. Now, when you look at Ole Miss's roster, people are going to say, well, Ole Miss can't win it because they're not there in the blue chip ratio or whatever stupid stuff is that. Well, this is the transfer portal age, which means that if these players actually got rated now after they went into the transfer portal, Ole Miss might be 60-70% blue chip of players on their roster. But if you're looking at high school recruiting and high school recruiting only, yeah, that's folly, man. That is really folly whenever you do that. I've said a lot, and Lane Kiffin says this as well. And he recruits in a way that he thinks this is true. When a player signs and commits with you out of high school, let's say you win the recruitment. Let's say Caleb Cunningham comes to Ole Miss. He decides to flip from Alabama and goes to Ole Miss. Great. You've done what you need to do NIL-wise to get that player to your university. Now you simply have 9 more chances for that player to go elsewhere and drive up that price. Lane Kiffin knows that, and he's figured out a way to attack it. And I think the way he finds value in the number of transfer portal windows left in a recruitment, depending on how good the player is. I genuinely think that somewhere in the Ole Miss program, there's a formula to determine worth of the player based on transfer portal windows, talent, and all of that stuff. One thing that they're not looking at is how good of a high school player they were. Just kind of is what it is. I'm really interested. That's the good news. That is the genuine good news of what can happen. Now, up next on Locked On Ole Miss, what could derail the Rebels season? We break down the key factors that could throw a wrench into Ole Miss's plans, and what do fans need to watch out for? Stay tuned for that. Hey, Locked On Ole Miss fans, I want to take a moment to give you a heads up about a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do. It's Ultimate College Football HC. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of the head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of, say, Ole Miss? From recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps and handling scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program, and it's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love about this game. You're responsible for calling offensive plays during the games. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, but it will shape the future and legacy of your program. Ultimate Football, College Football Head Coach, HC, is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And of course, we have a special offer for Locked On Ole Miss fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, that's all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk, as it will get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com. That's ultimate-cfb.com, or look it up in the app stores. That's Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. So let's play a little bit of devil's advocate. Everybody loves to talk about how positive I am, and I'm not going to apologize for being that positive and that level. But I'm also a realist, and I will tell you exactly like it is. I'm not going to look for bad news. I'm not going to just trying to invent hypotheticals where bad things can happen. That's not how I operate. But I will tell you like it is. And like, as an Ole Miss fan, I've looked at this season as the most anticipated season in the history of Ole Miss football. I think Jaxson Dart has a chance to leave as the numero uno on the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks at Ole Miss. If he wins all his games, gets Ole Miss to the playoffs, he will have done something that hasn't been done, essentially, in a long time. So how can this derail? What do we have to worry about? Now, obviously, injuries. We've all learned last time Ole Miss had an AP ranking this high was in 1970. We all know what happened in 1970. We've seen how a season can be derailed because of injury with Archie's broken arm and all of that. It's just, honestly, it's the stuff of legend of what's happened and the stories that I heard my whole life. But that's not the only thing that can derail this season. There's a couple of things that I think Ole Miss fans need to look out for. Now, I do not think that Lane Kiffin is going anywhere, but a coaching search and throwing that up. Everybody remembers what the Auburn coaching search was like in 2022. I think that has a chance to derail the season at a certain point of it. Lane Kiffin's buyout is at a level to where I think before December 8th or something like that, it's set up for like $4 million, and it goes up to an astronomical amount after that or something like that. I saw the story on the Clarion Ledger. I'm not a contract lawyer, but that's the way it came across to me. But in a situation to where you're playing against Georgia, let's say you win that game and all of a sudden you have to go down to Florida and it gets weird. I'm not saying Florida is the job to worry about or anything like that. That's the point where you need to be on guard. That's the point where you're worried about coaching searches derailing your season. Because let's be real about this. The media, the national elite, the media elite hates Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. They do not want Ole Miss to be where Ole Miss could end up at the end of the season. So they're going to use the fact that Lane Kiffin gets clicks to throw his name out to any job that comes open. That doesn't mean there's any fire there, but if you allow the smoke to overwhelm what's going on, it could be an impediment to the team, just like 2022. Like I said, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying this is a hypothetical of a way that the season could be derailed. So injuries, a coaching search, a weird coaching search, and weather. This is the situation that Ole Miss fans, this is going to come down to luck, honestly. In a game that it's just a deluge of rain comes down. Let's say Ole Miss is playing LSU or Ole Miss is playing Georgia or something to where the talent advantage is at least even on both sides, to where playing a game in the mud could be problematic. A game in the mud, a game in the snow, that could be difficult to deal with. That is a hypothetical that you might need to worry about. And coming up, let's see, I think April or August 20th until October 1st, those are the most active months for hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean. And obviously, you don't have to worry about necessarily a hurricane hitting Oxford, Mississippi. But if a hurricane hits somewhere around Houston to Lafayette, Louisiana, that's where it makes landfall. When it curves up, it's going to go directly over Ole Miss. I learned about this in Katrina when I was in Oxford, Mississippi, and whatever the hurricane that happened shortly after Katrina. There was 2 hurricanes that hit in Louisiana that kind of went up the same track. Those 3 things are the things that I think Ole Miss need to have their antenna up to see what will happen. Talent-wise, Ole Miss isn't going to be out-talented by anybody they play. They're not going to be out-coaching talent of anybody they play. They're not going to be less prepared than anybody they play. So outside circumstances are probably the only way that this Ole Miss football season gets derailed. We'll see. I am curious to see, again, and I've talked about this now multiple days, because as it gets closer, these are the things that I'm interested in. Who is the first quarterback against Furman after Jaxson Dart that goes on the field? I will be interested to see that. I will be interested to see which running back is on the field for Ole Miss the majority of the time. And if Rashad Amos wants the kinder, gentler training camp and real games happen, if he wakes up being the big bruiser that we all know that he can be. I'm interested to see how Chris Pupal does. I'm interested to see Rodney Gross, the transfer from UTSA, how he does. He's 6'2", 240 pounds. That's not nothing. And TJ Daugherty at the linebacker position, and how they use Sunterry and Perkins, those, and that defensive line that Lane Kiffin has gushed about all during training camp. And the defensive backs, how are they going to line up? What is it going to look like? There's so many players back there that have experience. I want to see how it looks. The NFL knows that Ole Miss has a chance to have a really good roster, if not the deepest roster in all of college football. They know that Ole Miss's coaching staff is top-notch. It's next level. Ole Miss has never had a coaching staff this good. Outside things are what Ole Miss fans need to worry about affecting their team this year. Should be interesting. We'll see how it goes. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves in offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the #1 Ole Miss podcast out there. So your support means the world to us. For your second listen, though, check out the Locked On College Football Podcast with Spencer McLaughlin. He will get you hyped up for an exciting season with in-depth discussions on the upcoming games and the ever-evolving landscape of college athletics. From conference realignment to the transfer portal to NIL updates, the new college football playoffs, Spencer covers it all. You can find Locked On College Football on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Also, exciting news. You can now become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider, the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. What is it? It's a texting program. We send you notifications on anything relevant that happens in Ole Miss sports without all the hassle of digging through a message board filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial and experience the future of college sports coverage. We're currently always adding new perks as we grow, so do not miss out. The link is down in the description if you're interested. And for those of you watching on YouTube, we are going to send you to Locked On College Sports right now. Howdy toddy, everyone.